That is correct. We are live this Wednesday morning. Lebang Khosana, Gareth Cliff, you, me, everybody's ready for a busy Wednesday morning and also the middle of the month of November. So we're heading downhill towards the end of the year. Thought it would be good to catch up with somebody who, this name should ring a lot of bells for people in South Africa. Dave Chislett. He's got davechislett.com. And he was born in Britain, raised in South Africa, and he currently lives in the Netherlands. He's a published author, poet, musician, and artist. He's also been an entrepreneur for 25 years. And the link that joins all the things in his life together is creativity, which I think is also something that Lebang knows a lot about. He's been on stage in one capacity or another since 1980. Dave, it's nice to have you on the show. How are you?
Good morning, Cliff. I'm well, thank you. I see you are
And
too.
nice to see you, man. Yeah, good. So, Lebang and I are fascinated by this term creativity activator. So, what is that? And tell us whether you saw a gap in the market here and what exactly it means. Because I mean, I don't want to sound stupid about it, but does the description tell you everything you need to know?
Yeah, Lebong had it spot on. I believe that every human being is actually inherently creative. There's no such thing as someone who's not creative. But a lot of us have been kind of socialized and shamed out of it. It's not something we own and actively pursue. So I see my job as to helping people discover that and then bring it to the front and expand it and learn how to use it. That's for me is the activation part of the job title.
All right, so there may be somebody sitting there listening to this right now going, "No, I'm not really creative."
Yeah.
You say everyone is creative, but what if they think that, "No, I'm not creative at all. I'm just a standard bookkeeper. I crunch numbers.
Yeah.
The more creative I am, the more dangerous my job gets."
Creative accounting, yeah.
How do you respond to people who don't think that they're creative? And then we'll get on to ones who do think they are.
Yeah. Well, look, I think what we need to first of all understand is that our sort of generally held societal notion of what creativity is based on high creative made by people who may not or may well be genii. And therefore, we're obsessed with this notion that it has to be radical, unique, extra special, only someone with a massive skill set could execute it. But actually, the fundamental process of creativity is so mundane that even the boring accountant who thinks he can't be creative actually is, because neurologically, what happens in his brain every single time he solves a creating problem is the same as the genius songwriter, actor, and poet.
But I mean, I could argue that they're not the same because we don't pay sufficient attention to the accountant who's doing what he has to do to make the books balance.
Yes.
Because it's boring and not creative. I mean, I'm just trying to be the devil's advocate here because there are going to be many of us who think that a lot of the things that we do, even creative people, Lebang, you know this too, on a day-to-day basis, a lot of the stuff that you do isn't very creative. You're actually just replying to emails or joining the dots, or, doing the obvious stuff.
But that's the thing. Creativity is if you like, the sausage machine, right? So an accountant puts in boring accounting knowledge, financial information, processes, and outcome solutions on the other side. The artist puts in technical skills, musical theoretical knowledge, and outcomes music on the other side. We are obsessed with what comes out the other side, and we mythologize what people put in on the front end, while quite conveniently ignoring the fact that the actual process is mundane. It's literally joining the dots. It's finding a somewhat new configuration of information actually already exists, and then having the correct skills level and type to bring that to the attention of others. And most of us don't have those skills, bringing it to the attention of others. It doesn't mean to say that everything we do is fundamentally mundane and not boring. It's just that, as you said, Gareth, most of us don't give a damn.
You agree with that, Lebang?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it's the how in which each individual uses their creativity to get that message across or for that output to be delivered. You'll deliver it in the same way, but in your same way. No two people will ever deliver it in the same way, regardless of how mundane the said process is. And I think that's where the creativity lies. And I mean, Dave, you can help me here, but in as much as we are all creatives, what really makes us all creatives is that we have our own unique ways of doing things. And that's the thing. So, as to your point, Gareth, oh, it's just sending an email. That's mundane. Sure. But how am I going to respond to this email? Am I going to be like, I hope this email finds you well. As discussed, please find attached. Or am I going to give it a little bit of pizzazz and, hey, hope you had a good weekend. Thank you so much. There's a delivery in things that sets you apart from the next person. And when you receive an email and it's like an AI written thing, you're already like, oh my days, yawn. But if it's a human that's added personality, a little bit of pizzazz, it's already got that better touch. And I think that's where the creativity lies. It's just, how does everybody uncover their creativity? And that's the thing that I'd like to know, Dave, is how does every single person on earth just tap into that and believe that, damn, I actually am a creative person?
All right, so that's what's this way. That's what's on the wall behind me there. Rebel, reject, create. So I mean, it may sound like a particularly anarchic or nihilistic creed, but in essence, what I'm saying is that the way our world works is very pattern and rule governed, right? So we want people to do what we tell them to do so that we get more of what we've already got, because that's how the economy grows. That's how we get richer. That's how you stay poorer. Now, if you want to break out of any kind of cycle and get any kind of different result, you have to immediately start behaving differently. If you change the inputs, you will change the outputs. So step number one is to rebel against the status quo, against the rules, against the way we've always done it, where that's right and this is wrong. The second step is then to do the same thing to yourself, to question your own assumptions, your own biases, because like Tabang mentioned, we all come from our own corner. Someone growing up in Soweto has a totally different worldview and perspective of someone growing up in Sandton. And, English speaking, Portuguese speaking, Tswana speaking, whatever gender orientation, all of this plays a fundamental role in how we encounter and process and act in the world. So if you start to question the assumptions which underpin the way you act, you step out of your comfort zone into a territory where it is then possible to create, because then you have nothing. And you are forced to rejoin the dots into a new configuration. So for anybody who's listening to this thinking, well, I'm here and I'm bored and I'm stuck in a rut and I don't know what to do, the first thing you should do is go and break some rules. And they don't have to be massive rules that are going to end up with you in jail, but you just need to start doing things differently. Start questioning, well, why do we always do it that way? Why do I always do it that way? And then you'll step into this quite confusing, gray, muggy, horrible place, which most people avoid at all costs, where new connections become possible because you're no longer attached to the solutions you had.
Okay, but I'm going to, again, have to be the devil's advocate here, because you say break rules.
Yes.
And most people are exactly opposed to that idea. They are so scared of breaking the rules. And really, this has always been the case throughout human history. There are always going to be a couple of leaders and many, many followers. And those followers are better at following the rules. They don't want to break the rules because there's chaos on the other side of that. And chaos can be, for most people who are orderly and like their life to be organized, chaos is the most scary thing in the world.
Only if that's all you've ever known, and that's what you've been raised to expect, and that's how you project your identity into the future. There's this myth attached to being creative that it's one step away from madness. And I think that's a very convenient cliche. And I'm glad you said this, Gareth, because I firmly believe that in actual fact, none of that is true. History is written by the victors, and the victors, of course, want to maintain power. So they're going to tell people it's really essential that they obey the rules so that order is kept so that they can be happy. And yet, if you look around the world today, by and large, your average human being is not happy because they live under circumstances which are oppressive and which require them to obey bunches of rules which do not serve them. And I don't frankly just believe any of that stuff anymore. I would welcome a bit more chaos, because I think people would then be forced into self-actualization as opposed to this weird androidic charade of rule following that we currently have.
More chaos.
Yes, more chaos.
All right. Bring it on.
It'll lead to more creativity. I mean, I completely, I hear that. I also feel like creativity as itself, it's almost like a muscle that we need to continuously exercise. So you can find yourself being very creative in your childhood, like doing art at school, dancing,
Yeah.
blah, blah, coming up with raps, whatever the case is. And then you get into adulthood and then you fall into the line of
Yes, but
monotone.
why? But why do you give up on
Exactly.
it? You know
Exactly.
why? Because you get shamed out of it. Because
Mm.
someone somewhere on the line says, "Yeah, who do you think you are, Ricky Martin? You're never going to be Sylvester Stallone. You're just not hard enough to be doing that." And we are taught to get embarrassed about our output
Mm.
because it doesn't meet this mythical genius level standard. And it's got nothing to do with that. It's about self-expression. It's about being who you are. And it just gets bludgeoned out of us. I mean, that's what standardized testing at school does. It
Yo.
tells you there is no gray, there is right and there is wrong. And you will spend the rest of your life shoving
But,
stuff into
but
little
Dave,
boxes.
I mean, let's be realistic here too. Unfortunately, and I have my problems with the education system and with parenting, because God knows that's not a perfect science. But the
Hmm.
fact is, we can't have a system better than life for catering to individuals. And that includes the bumps and the knocks and the people telling you that you're not as great as you are and all of that stuff that goes against the grain of what you're saying here to bring creativity out. What we have been doing in the last little while, and it's a novel experiment for humanity, is many kids all over the world have been raised in this environment where creativity is encouraged. They're never told they're not good enough, etc. And it's actually resulted in less happiness, not more. A lot of these kids are now
Yes.
directionless, confused. They're not
Yep.
sure exactly what to do because their parents and their teachers have said to them, just be you, live your life, self actualize, try anything you want. Nothing's bad, everything's good. And it hasn't necessarily helped a lot of these kids.
Now, thank you again. I love it. You're pushing all my buttons. Yeah, absolutely. Because nothing is a siloed, self contained, closed off system. So everything I'm saying is fantastic. But if you don't have discipline, if you don't
Yeah.
have routine, if you don't have somebody every now and then who's saying to you, you know what, that can be better. No, that's not good enough. Do something different. In other words, a
Mm.
conflicting collaborator, you will not be
Mm.
pushed. And if you're not pushed, quite frankly, yeah, human beings and nature itself tends towards entropy. It's all just going to slide downhill into a big blubbery pool of mud. So
Mm.
there's an uneasy tension here. The creative process itself is part behind the scenes using your unconscious brain, kind of to all intents and purposes, magic, and part hardcore rationality, logic, joining A to B to C to follow to a new answer. That's also a weird dynamic, a weird dichotomy. So, Cliff, I think you're absolutely right. Too much of either one is a bad thing. I think in general, in the history of the human race, we've tended way too much towards the rules. Let's control the hell out of everybody.
Totally.
And maybe we're going to a sort of reset moment where it's not going to go well for a while we've got all these, but also, millennial bashing, Cliff, it's a thing. Just because they do it differently doesn't mean to say it's bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, the jury's still out on how successful they will be at making themselves useful to the rest of us, because there's a huge difference between self-expression, self-expression and creativity. No, but I mean,
Yes, there
again,
is.
like, I don't know why I'm being the bad guy in this call, but it's all good and well to talk about creativity and opportunity and people chasing their dreams and all that stuff. Somebody's got to be realistic about this. And if you don't make yourself useful
Yeah.
to other people, if you aren't doing things for society at large, and if the creative ideas that you're coming up with they don't have some utility, then really it's just it's like a Mona Lisa that was never painted. It's just an
Yeah.
idea, and
Mm.
and,
Look,
and it's not useful to anybody.
no,
So
and the
you have
best idea in the world isn't useful to anybody if you don't have the skill set to execute
To
it to a high
execute.
degree of usability.
okay, but then I've got a question for both of you, because you
Yeah.
are both self kind of declared creatives, and in both your cases there's enough evidence to show that you know what you're talking about. But is the person who executes the stuff necessarily also the person who has to come up with the idea? Because those are different qualities, and sometimes the person who comes with the ideas is good at that, and then you need somebody else to take it and execute it.
You've
Mm.
been reading the literature, Cliff. Yeah. There's an organization in the States that call themselves Foresight, who reckon that it's not that there are creative people and not creative people. is that creative people can loosely be divided up into 4 categories: big ideas people, fine detail people, executors, and developers. So no, in fact, you're absolutely right. I mean, yes, you're absolutely right, Cliff. Sometimes the person who comes up with the idea is not best placed to execute it or develop it, or hasn't got the frame of mind or reference to do the fine detail checking to see if it'll ever even damn work. That's why teams and open, transparent collaboration is so important, especially now while technology is changing so fast. Because quite frankly, we can't, we can't do all of this stuff on our own.
We're not
There's too much
islands.
specialist knowledge.
Yeah, Gareth, I'm actually going to bring it closer to home. You know, when Rena does those personality tests with us, she'll put all of us in the room and she'll say, okay, answer a couple of questions. And then she'll say, okay, you 3 are drivers, you 4 are communicators, you 4 are analysts, and the rest of you. She'll group you based on your personality. You and I in the staff are the driver communicators. We come up with ideas, and then there's the analysts in the team who are the people that actually, work on the numbers and check out the stats. They're the implementers and the executors. I think a big part of creativity is definitely understanding where your creativity starts and ends, and at what point you need to bring other people into the process, and other people that are way better equipped than you. If you are just the ideas person, be that, live in that, and excel in that. And you will find the executors that you work well with that are only executors, that are good at that, and be that. And then you've got this great team of people going around finding creative solutions to problems that we have. And these are problems that are previously, maybe the solutions are pretty stock standard. We're trying the same thing and nothing's changing. The minute you put in a creative in there or a creative team, the solutions are completely different, and they are the ones that most likely work because you're not giving it the same eye or the same attention. So teamwork is a huge part of it, and that also brings in the reality check of, you're not all just going in there like, let's do this, woo, this is gonna be fun. Somebody in there's gonna be like, okay, slow down guys, let's be real, is this gonna work?
Yeah. I mean, like what Cliff's doing here, and geez, why do I keep on calling you Cliff? What Gareth is doing here in this interview is exactly that, right? He's acting as the antagonistic collaborator. He's being difficult. He's saying, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? What does that lead to? Better answers,
100%.
more clarity. It's
100%.
part of the process. It has to be embraced. Absolutely.
All right, well, let's talk about your background for a little bit, because I remember you and your name came up a lot in South African music when I was, before I was even in radio, I was just a listener, and people used to talk about Dave Chislett and how you knew everybody in the music business. And you helped many South African bands to kind of get out there and do what they needed to do. Just explain to everybody what that was, because, there may be people who don't know any of that history.
Well, it's very gracious of you, Gareth, because I think you were one of the people when you were on that other large national radio station that I used to take regular pot shots at, because I was unhappy with how much South African music was being played on the radio.
I had anything to do with it. Management and quotas had zero to do with me, but it's fine.
Yeah, I know. I started writing poetry when I was 10. When I was 17, my best mate at the time, Julian, said, hey, let's turn some of those into songs, because he could play multiple musical instruments. And that led to me being in bands. And I did that all the way through the end of high school, through national service, and then university. And then I kind of made the step into actually managing bands, because basically I was a no-hope, useless bass player who could only play quavers across 3 chords. I was much better at organizing stuff. And that led to me meeting Mr. Barney Simon, who's really Mr. South African alternative rock, and starting a career as a music journalist and promoter while doing regular South African music updates on that national broadcaster. So, I mean, it's quite funny, like Mr. South African music, it just shows you the sort of like white privilege. I mean, the whole Kwaito hip-hop thing was exploding around me. I didn't know anybody from those scenes. I was totally immersed in the white rock underground kind of thing, which even in the 90s was still very much a white rock underground. Luckily, I don't think it's like that anymore, but it was a very segmented, weird thing. So that's my background. I mean, I started off as a poet, goodness me, and somehow kind of got enveloped in rock and roll, which took me 20 years to kind of come out the other side of.
All right. Well, I mean, it's interesting because musicians are probably some of the most creative people in the world, and people who can write songs are even a level above that to me. Because those
Mm.
people, they just come up with something which is entirely original, which is based on those 8 keys on the keyboard, and a couple
Yeah.
of sharps and flats. I mean, it drives me. It drives me crazy that I can't do that because I have such respect and admiration for people who can.
Yeah.
Do you ever and Labang, this goes for you too. Do you ever like rank the creative arts in any kind of hierarchy? Because I often think that someone who can paint, draw, sculpt, write music, those people are truly mind-bogglingly brilliant in some way, if they can do it for that matter. But then you get the next kind of rung down, who are the ones who can perform it, who are also tremendously talented, because that requires
Yeah.
creativity, especially
Mm,
because every performance is different. And then kind of a rung under that are the people who can replicate it. And
Mm.
in my mind, those are three categories that I can ascribe certainly to artistic pursuits that are creative. But I don't
Yeah.
know if that's accurate. And I'm really trying always to figure out sort of how things fit together. And that's why I drew up
Yeah.
this hierarchy in my head. Do you agree with it, or do you think it's stupid?
I don't think it's stupid. I don't think I've ever heard it before. Look, a high degree of technical skill is no guarantee of catchy originality.
sure.
So those two things are actually separate. So, I mean, I've played in bands with classically educated,
Mm,
technically wildly good people, but they weren't the songwriter
hmm.
because they didn't have the ideas. They didn't have the sound in their head, which led to a at least partly unique combination of those notes on a keyboard that led
Mm,
to a catchy melody, which they
Yeah.
could then, using their technical knowledge, create an orchestration around. So for me, yeah, what you're saying holds true. There's a big difference between the people who are creating the music and just playing it, which is not to say the people who are just playing it are not creative or talented in any way. It's just that there's a component from the one that isn't present in the other. So there is definitely that. And
Yeah,
what I've
by the way, the reason that I create these systems in my head is not to say one is better than the other. It's
mm,
mm,
more to explain the different layers of creativity. I mean, I do think, by and large, that someone who can make something out of nothing
yeah.
yeah,
is truly that's a different category to those who have tremendous technical expertise, and, as you say, can really perform something
yeah.
beautifully, and even change it in the actual performance every time, because I think that's also a skill.
I mean, there's so
Yeah.
much going on here. Sometimes in certain disciplines, you have to reach an incredibly high level of technical ability in order to do things differently to create the new stuff. But in other disciplines, not having a huge amount of technical ability allows you to break rules in such ways that you come up with really interesting stuff that actually
Mm,
works.
Mm,
So on the one hand, I'm thinking fine art painting,
mm,
like you've really got to have your chops down to be able to do anything different and inspiring and new there. But I mean, hello, punk rock, Two Chords and the Truth. Those guys knew nothing about music, but still created very catchy, memorable tunes
yeah.
because they knew nothing. And
mm,
so I think it's very area and context specific
yeah.
which approach is going to work in which area.
Yeah, I think I agree. It definitely boils down to that specific industry that we're speaking of. Where, for example, if you look at in music, if you have like a group of people battling in a rap and now everybody's told to freestyle, you are then coming up with things on the top of the dome, just in the moment. You haven't
Yeah.
had the opportunity to write things down as a songwriter. You're just coming up with stuff. Some would say that is peak creativity because you're living in the moment, using the energy that's around you to come up with the stuff. But in the same context, if you are an amazing songwriter and you've sat down and you've just put down just amazing words that come together so well with the beat, that in itself is also amazing creativity. So
Yeah.
for me, I would say it just boils down to the person, regardless of the industry you're in. It's how you're exercising your creativity over and over and over and over again, in the same way that you'd exercise at the gym. How big are your muscles getting? How big is your creativity getting? How strong is it getting? How clever,
Yeah.
how much more interesting? Are you viewing the world? That for me is the bottom line. It boils down to the person.
What about the other part of this, which is, when someone like Kanye West comes along, and he is undoubtedly one of the most creative people in the world. He's also like very close. You said creativity and madness live close together, but
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff that makes Kanye sound like he's a total lunatic and upsets lots of people. And he will say stuff that is outrageous, and he'll say stuff that is offensive, and he'll be completely counterintuitive with most of the stuff. And yet he believes, his self-belief is so great that he just powers through criticism and
Yeah.
comes out on the other side, usually winning.
Yeah.
There's something about creativity that's also rebellious and doesn't give a shit what people think, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely. But also don't forget that somebody who's achieved the level that Kanye has got a closed feedback circuit around him in his immediate bubble. And he also has the money to outlast the curve of disapproval.
Yeah. Yeah.
So once you're there, and this is what happens to highly famous people, they often become detached from what we know as reality because they literally don't experience what we experience on a day-to-day basis. That's kind of what allows them to come up with out-of-the-box counterintuitive stuff that works, but it's also what leads to Kanyeisms and complete disconnect from what is happening in the real world. So, when you become a celebrity and when you become incredibly rich, it is often difficult to continue to be creative because your frame of reference essentially shrinks because it creates an envelope around you which other ordinary people can't penetrate. There's a good
Okay, but
reason.
I would say that's true, but not for him. I mean, like, it appears to me that even when he's doing the things that nobody likes and that people have a problem with, this guy is still miles ahead of people who are, plugged in and researching stuff and listening to everyone's opinion. He's coming
Yeah.
up with absolutely mind-bending, totally original stuff. And even if he's in this closed feedback loop, and even if he's doing things that ordinary members of the public may regard as being a little bit too risky, dangerous, out of the box, to use that horrible terminology, he still wins. He wins, and he
Yeah.
produces products that people love. Remember, he started as a music producer, and he was very good at that. Everybody said, "Oh, Kanye is so amazing at this." Then he said, "I'm going to rap." Everyone was like, "Well," and
You
and
shouldn't.
remember, in Jay-Z's company, they all said to him, "No, you shouldn't rap because you're not that good." And he said, "Fuck you," and he went ahead and did it. And then he became arguably one of the best rappers, if not the best in some people's opinion, in the 2000s. Then he decided, I'm going to go into fashion. So he designs these shoes, and everybody goes, "These are horrible shoes. You're never going to make it." All the fashion experts tell him, "Kanye, this is going to be a disaster. Don't do it." He goes ahead and he becomes a juggernaut that blows the rest of them out of the water.
Yeah.
Everything this guy does, he does in spite of the knowledge of the people who are supposedly the experts, and he wins.
Yeah. But remember, Gareth, with Kanye, what Kanye had from birth was that self-belief and that constant approval from his mother, which really set him apart from most of his peers. His mom literally single-handedly said every single day, "Dude, you can be the best. Whatever you do, whatever you touch will be gold." And that's why, as Kanye West, he doesn't need anybody else's opinion as to whether this will work or not. And I say that to say this, Dave, what link is there between creatives and almost like that self-worth or that self-belief? Because using Kanye as an example kind of proves that if
Yeah.
you just believe in yourself 100%, not give a rat's ass about what anybody's saying, you can stay ahead of the curve and you can be your most creative version of yourself. So how much of that, self-reflection-y side of life matters in the whole creativity process?
Well, you've answered your question in your question. You said he can, not he will. And I think that's really what it comes down to. Yes, self-belief, confidence is critical in creativity because essentially every time you do something new, you're stepping into the unknown. You're taking a chance. You're breaking some rules. You're going where someone's never been before, and you're exposing yourself to, I mean, especially these days, online hate, criticism. Blah. If you don't have belief in what you're doing, it's very hard to do that over and over and over again. But by the same token, people are doing this all day, every day, and they're not Kanye West. So you also have to get lucky. You have to be in the right time at the right place so that when you get lucky, your chops are down, your knife is sharp, and you can deliver the goods. I mean, think about Kanye West, that progression that Gareth just outlined, where he was first a successful record producer, right? Then he became a really good rapper, right? Now, how much time as a rich, successful record producer did Kanye West have to put into practicing becoming a good rapper compared to someone who's hustling on the streets, has to make a living, has to stay out of trouble, what,
Sure.
a lot
Sure.
more. Now, Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours of mastery have been somewhat discredited, but still, if you've got a benchmark in front of you, which he did because he produced all the best rappers, and you are constantly striving for improvement and you put in those kinds of hours, you're gonna get so good over time that once you're there, people won't really be able to tell if you were a genius to start with, or whether you just turned yourself into one.
Sure.
And who cares really? Because there's no way to measure.
Exactly. Who cares?
There's no like creativity index where you have ranked in terms of who the most creative person on earth is.
Yeah.
Because
how would you do that?
You could argue that someone like Elon Musk, who is much more on the analyst and driver side of things, that this guy is more creative than some of the people on the more artistic side of things, because he thinks big. He thinks like, I'm going to get to Mars.
Yeah.
I want to make electric cars. I want to drill tunnels under California for transport. I want to solve problems. And he comes up with creative solutions to problems, which technically most of us would not say is creative, but it actually is, according to your definition, right?
Absolutely. He's on my top 10 list of when I give examples of people who are highly creative that most people don't think of. I always, unfortunately, considering recent developments with him, mention Elon Musk.
So there is a list. You even use one.
Well, otherwise people don't understand what I'm talking about, Gareth. Frame of reference, very useful.
Who else is on that list? Top 5. Not in order, but just, top 5 creatives who have made a success of themselves.
Well, I mean, people like Beyonce, again, very much like Kanye West, right? Became successful doing one thing and then just branched, into fashion, lingerie, perfume, acting, you name it, also production.
Sure.
I think she's enormously creative. I mean, Albert Einstein, if you want to come up with a general theory of relativity, you first have to conceive of the idea that it may exist. And he did that really early on. He spent decades trying to prove it before he went out with it. And that's also, again, the hidden mechanics behind this stuff. We tend to get very carried away with the shiny end product, whilst being very coy and in denial about the blood, sweat, and tears that went on for years behind the scenes in order to get there.
Tell me about Holland. Is that a nice environment to be creative in? You're in the Netherlands.
In the Netherlands. Well, it's very different to South Africa in that it's an extremely well-established economy and society. So there are structures for absolutely everything, public transport and what have you. And that, in many ways, is extremely liberating. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you live in a highly structured society, the kind of day-to-day pressures about actually staying alive and making a living are really at arm's length, which then puts you into a space where you can dedicate time and effort to more rarefied concerns. But then here comes the flip side. Because it's so organized and orderly and established, it's also very civilized, and there are very few rough edges, which means that things can get homogenous and gray really quickly. So as a foreigner living in the Netherlands, I find it very stimulating because it's different for me. But I think as a Dutch person, I mean, you've all met Dutch people in South Africa. Why the hell are they there? Well, because they're bored of how safe and well-run and predictable the Netherlands is.
I think your environment can have a lot to do with how creative you are.
Mm,
It's
I think,
mm,
critical.
and sometimes the people who are the most thoughtful and genius about changing things are the ones who come from the most difficult and arduous backgrounds, because that stuff gives you insights that you wouldn't have had if you'd been comfortable and grown up in, the supposed first world with, good education and healthcare and everything else provided for you.
No, you wouldn't have.
mm.
And it's a thing that a lot of big businesses just gloss over. The environment is critical. So not just the environment that people emerged from, but the one they go to every day to work.
Sure. Yeah.
We really don't pay enough attention to making those environments conducive to happiness, because happiness is a key indicator of productivity. And
Sure.
happy, productive employees are people who stay in their jobs, care about their businesses, and make them better. But instead, we're kind
Well,
of
hang on.
obsessed on
Hang on,
widgets.
because happy doesn't necessarily translate to great or to creative either. I know lots of creative people, and some of them are the most unhappy people you will ever meet. They're never satisfied. They're always chasing the next thing. They're always trying to perfect something. They're always trying to come up with a
Yes.
better version of it. The happiness doesn't factor into creativity in any way. They're unrelated.
So,
Don't you
Gareth,
think?
happiness is the end of the road, not the process, according to what you just said.
No, no, I don't think that they even are on spectra that meet. I don't think these are lines that ever meet on any graph. I think, sometimes some people are completely happy when they're in a routine. They do the same thing every day. They aren't applying themselves creatively to stuff. They're really in a sort of bubble of existence where they're
Are they
basically,
though?
Yeah.
yeah,
So
I think
I'm
they
going to
are.
attack this terminology here. Cliff, I think doing it again. Gareth, I think they're content. And I don't think that's the same as happiness.
Mm.
The scenario that you sketched, people never happy, always looking for the better thing, are always living at the edge of their capacity. They are truly alive. It's what Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi defines flow as being peak optimal experience, where you are in a space where, because you are stepping out of your comfort zone, you are deploying as much of your skill set as possible. It's challenging, it's rewarding. Is that happiness? Well,
Is
yeah,
that related to ambition?
it can be, but I don't think it necessarily has to be. It can become an end in and of itself, because once you've stepped into flow, it's a bit like getting stoned for the first time. It's a state that exists in your mind that you want to recapture for and in and of itself. And a
Yeah, I
lot of
know.
people tie ambition to that, but it's not required.
Mm.
I
I don't know.
don't think. What do you think, Lebang?
I think the idea of somebody doing the same thing every single day, taking the same route to work, doing the same routine in the household every single day, I don't know if anybody can truly, truly say, I am happy with this. You can definitely be content. You can definitely be perhaps even at peace because it is your life and it is what it is. But there is definitely there's a place where happiness and creativity definitely meet, in my opinion. But also, yeah, that just it depends for you how you view it. Dave, I think I want to know about like the kind of clients that you service, because now you've taken all of your life experiences, you've packaged them into like nice little neat systems, and you're
Yeah.
here to save the world and make
Yes.
everybody unlock their creativity, and I love that for you. So if I own a business and I can tell that my employees are not being creative, they don't like it here, I need help, and you're the guy I call.
Yeah.
What are your favorite kinds of people to service, and what does that look like? Because again, like to Gareth's point, somebody listening out there is probably like, what the hell are these people smoking? There has to just be, there must be systems to this. But the way you're
Yeah.
describing it, it's a thing that is practiced and it's worked and people have benefited from this.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do a lot of work in business, in corporates, or with entrepreneurs. And the reason why people come to me is that they've realized that the environment that they're doing business in is changing and changing fast. And they
Mm,
simply can't keep up because they don't know how to keep up. And so what
Mm.
I'm often doing is going into these places and saying to people, well, actually, the way that you typically approach things is if things do not change. So a lot of your
mm,
processes and your approach and your tools are predicated on the idea that things will not, do not, and should not change. And I'm saying that absolutely the flip side, the opposite, is true. So how do you need to then behave? What systems do you need to have in place for a situation that is in constant flux? Because that's very different. You know, the contentment doing the same thing over and over every day approach versus the I'm going to push myself, even when this is supposed to be finished, I'm going to do the next thing and the next better thing and the next better thing. That's a fundamental difference in mindset. And so because businesses are very codified and very rule driven and KPI and KPA and don't color outside the lines, they often actually struggle to deal with rapid change because the mindset is obedient. It's giving us more of what we already have. And that's what I tackle. I'm going to say, well, really? What's that given us so far? And how's that going to look in 3 years? Let's do something different. And I've got a whole grab bag of tools that, you know, even if you don't really want to, you will end up thinking differently about stuff just because of the way the tool functions.
Yeah, are people who are good with money also always creative, or are those two not necessarily related either?
Okay, so I'm glad you said good with money as opposed to just rich, because clearly the way our global system works is if you already have money, you don't pay tax, and you will just get richer and richer no matter what else you actually get up to. I think quite often people who are good with money are creative because they're able to spot the gap. They're able to do unexpected things. You know, the people who dived into crypto with both boots on and then got out, were not following a curve. They were following an instinct. They were following their own idea. So I think those two things often do go together. But I think there's a difference between creating wealth, being good with money, and staying rich.
Yeah, because I sometimes struggle to see the link between those two, but I think you've made a pretty good explanation of it now. So your website says, when I write a poem, I solve a problem. So I always thought that, you know, poetry, there are very good poets in the world, but everybody thinks again that they've got a poet in them, and a lot of people's poetry is horrible.
Yes, mine too, by the way.
Because it's self-indulgent. And it's the last thing any of us want to hear. It's like your worst fear is when someone comes up to you and goes, "Oh, I've written this poem. Do you want to hear it?" Anyway, what you mean there, I think, has less to do with literal poetry.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I do literally mean that when I write a poem, I'm solving a problem. I have an idea in my head. I have a notion. I have an emotional response. I'm like, how the hell do I select words in order to make what I'm feeling clear to someone who's going to read these black squiggles on a page? That's a problem. And so when I write a poem, I'm trying to solve that problem. I'm trying to arrange words in a poem in a way that makes what I'm feeling or wanting to communicate absolutely clear to the person who ends up reading it. But it's also metaphorical because in essence, that's what every problem is. We've got an idea, we've got a notion, and we need to find the path and the platform or the mechanism to get it out to other people. So, hey, it's really meta, actually. Thanks, Cliff.
What about
Gareth? Why do I keep on calling you Cliff?
Jesus. You're not being very creative. You're not being very creative about this, Dave. Jesus, it's one quick thing to remember, and it's even written on the screen in front of you.
This is the
Listen, what about this idea of writer's block? I mean, you see a lot of people get stuck. You mentioned it in the discussion with Lebang about clients of yours and kind of who you're helping, but many of us who may or may not consider ourselves hugely creative, and I think most of us deep down inside want to be more creative, even if we don't think we are, because it's creating is the closest you get to divinity during your life. When you're actually making something, when you're creating ideas, when you're coming up with plans, when you're thinking in abstract ways, this is how you know you're alive. And I wonder how we get past that feeling that all of us have felt, where you just go, I can't get past this thing. I need to do this. There are deadlines. There are imperatives. I've got this problem I want solved. I'm feeling frustrated. How to get past it?
Yeah. So I wrote a book about that called Unblock Creative Block, Writer's Block, but actually it works for all creative things. Yeah. You know, it does happen. And I think the problem is that a lot of people think that it's a problem and that it's something that needs to be fixed and needs to be solved. But actually, I view it more as a red flag. When you get blocked, it's yourself telling you something's not right. It's not going where it should. You're essentially trying to push through very, very thick treacle. And it's thick treacle because that's resistance from the idea that you're processing. And what I've learned over the years is I just need to trust myself. If I feel that, I just stop. I walk away. I go and do something else. I go read a book. I speak to people. I get outdoors. I get busy with something else. Because that problem, where I'm stuck, then goes into the back of my mind, into my unconscious mind, which operates very slowly and uses way more capacity of my actual brain than my rational waking mind. And I trust that in a couple of days or a couple of weeks, I'll go back to the project and I'll have a new idea to push through the treacle. I'll have a new approach. I'll have a new takeaway. And I think what happens is that people get blocked and they get stuck and they assume that that's the end of the road, that it's finished, that it's done. And I don't believe that. I believe that that is part of the process. It's the process saying, no, doesn't work, try again, do something differently. And
what do you do, Lebang? When you're stuck, what do you do?
Yeah, it's definitely that. If I'm in the office and I'm having like creativity block and I'm like, I just can't get through this, you'll probably find me taking a walk across the road to Popeyes and go try some chicken that I don't usually try. If I'm at home and I'm with the kids, I interestingly enough, I do this thing of just like switching off the TV. And I force us to all kind of sit and conversate and, watch. I specifically like watching my kids having to come up with things to do. Because for them, it's like, well, TV is all we're going to know. They growing up in a time where there's devices and this and this and that. The kids are forced to walk outside and go and play and pick up stuff and make stuff. And that kind of makes me sad because I'm like, damn, like it's so easy for them to just fill in those gaps. And as an adult, now I don't know if I still have that bone inside of me that where I can just go outside and build something or make something with my actual hands. And so it's a range of things, but it's definitely stopping what I'm doing in the moment and just doing something completely different. Like, for example, taking a tuk-tuk to work every other week. I mean, it shows you different things, and it kind of opens up your mind to having conversations with people that you'd probably never meet, like the conversations that you have with Uber drivers. My word, like it's hectic out there. So it's engaging with different people, doing different things. And yeah, it's to Dave's point, just being a rebel, not going, not always following the same rules, and being uncomfortable is kind of the cost, because the cost is this is weird. I don't usually do this. And I see that with my kids. The minute the TV goes off, they don't know how to act. Now they have to think. Now they have to come up with stuff. And they're like, Mommy, I'm bored. I'm like, tough titties, bro. Come up with some stuff to do. And that's when you see the creativity process, even in their small little minds, the human, creativity that they're born with, that just pops out. And it's a beautiful thing. And it sucks that over time that thing gets like crushed by society, man. Screw society.
Dave in the comments says, I agree. The outdoors is an antidote to writer's block. Sometimes I just stroll around the block. I've also heard from writers who are very prolific that what they do is they just keep writing. So even if they're writing bullshit and it's not very well thought through, it's not very interesting, they just keep going until something eventually lands that feels good.
Yeah, it's like farting. Yeah, it's better out than in.
Sure. Well, that's for sure.
That's a nice note. So yeah, that's what people do. They, because again, we get obsessed with this idea that it all needs to be quality, and when in actual fact, you need to generate a lot of quantity and get a lot of the really bad stuff out in order to get to the good stuff. So when you're stuck and you feel that maybe if you're writing, this is just drivel, carry on. Yeah. Just carry on, get it out. But then tomorrow or next week, it'll be gone. And you'll have made space for something else.
Very good.
Also, I think there's a big do you energy with regards to that. There's no thing, like there's no list of things to do if you're definitely stuck. Try all of it and resonate to the one that works for you better.
Yes.
It's not a controlled system where there's a list that you have to follow. It is so closely linked to who you are as an individual and how you express yourself and whatever mediums you choose to excel that makes it actually work. And the more you understand yourself, the better of a creative you'll become.
Agreed. Couldn't have said it better myself.
I love it. I also think you said this, which I completely agree with. You're forever curious, which leads you to always ask why and how. As a result, you've been able to join the dots across many worlds. Being curious and being interested in other people, other things, what's going on around you. This is essential. And that'll bring you happiness too, because then you're never actually sitting around going, I'm bored, because there's always something to stimulate the mind. And when there's things to stimulate the mind, you try to solve problems. Before you know it, you're being creative.
But you also sometimes need to be bored, because boredom also drives you to solve problems. You're like, oh my God, I've got to change this. I'm so bored.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. You get into a rut, right? And
Yeah.
you need to break out of that. Okay, I love it. Dave, nice to catch up with you. And thanks for being on the show this morning. It was lovely to hear what you're up to. And Lebang, we will see you next week, tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. For the rest of us, have an awesome day, everybody. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Gareth. Ciao.
Ciao.